A grown adult, mortgage, back pain, a coffee that costs more than their first video game, standing in a parking lot, completely frozen. Not because of a medical emergency, not because they saw a ghost, because a 1994 Toyota Supra just pulled up next to them, and something broke inside their brain. Their hands got slightly sweaty, their jaw did that thing, their eyes went soft in a way their spouse hasn't seen in years, and for exactly 4 seconds, they were 12 years old again, sitting cross-legged on a carpet, controller in hand, choosing that exact car in Gran Turismo before they even knew what a transmission was. This is not a car story. This is a psychological hostage situation, and the hostage has been held captive since 1997. Today, we're going to dissect exactly why an entire generation of adults, people who survived recessions, student debt, and the emotional damage of dial-up internet, are now spending their 30s and 40s desperately trying to buy back a feeling they never actually owned in the first place. Buckle up. This one goes deep. Let's start with the crime scene. The human brain between the ages of 8 and 14 is essentially a sponge that's been soaked in gasoline and handed a lit match. Everything that hits it during that window doesn't just get remembered, it gets branded. Neuroscientists call this the reminiscence bump, the phenomenon where memories formed during adolescence are disproportionately vivid, emotionally charged, and stubbornly permanent compared to memories formed at literally any other point in your life. Your brain at age 10 was not casually watching a Mazda RX-7 drift through a mountain pass on a TV screen. It was filing that moment under "This is what freedom looks like. This is what arriving looks like. This is what the version of me I want to become drives." And here's the part that makes this genuinely fascinating rather than just sad. The car wasn't the point. The car was a container for every feeling that 10-year-old brain was desperately trying to organize. Excitement about the future, the first taste of autonomy, the intoxicating idea that adulthood was going to be spectacular. The Supra wasn't a car, it was a promise. The RX-7 wasn't a vehicle, it was a destination. The NSX wasn't transportation, it was proof that the world was going to reward you for growing up. And your brain, being the tragically efficient emotional filing system that it is, stapled all of those feelings directly onto the hood of a Japanese sports car and said, "We'll come back to this." Now, this emotional imprinting happens to every generation, so why did it hit millennials with the force of a turbocharged engine? Because the 1990s were, objectively, the most aggressive car worship era in modern pop culture history, and it was aimed directly at children. Think about what was happening simultaneously. The Cold War ended, the economy was booming, the internet existed but hadn't yet destroyed everyone's attention span, and Hollywood, the gaming industry, and television all decided at the exact same moment that cars were characters. Not props, not background elements, characters. Knight Rider gave a car a personality. Initial D gave a car a soul. The Fast and the Furious gave a car a moral code. Gran Turismo gave a car to a child who couldn't legally drive one and let them own it, modify it, master it. That last one is critical because there's a profound psychological difference between wanting something and simulating ownership of it. When a 12-year-old spent 40 hours in Gran Turismo tuning a Nissan Skyline GTR, adjusting the suspension, learning the tracks, winning races, your brain didn't register that as fantasy. Your brain registered that as experience. Psychologists call this simulation-based desire consolidation. The more vividly you simulate owning something, the more your brain encodes it as a legitimate, unmet need rather than a passing want. You didn't just want the skyline, you had already owned it in the only reality your developing brain could access. And then someone turned off the PlayStation and sent you to school. Let's continue with the betrayal. Here's where the story gets genuinely cruel. Every generation makes a deal with the future. You work hard, you grow up, you get the things you were promised. Millennials made that deal in the 1990s, during the most economically optimistic decade in recent memory, and then watched the terms get renegotiated repeatedly without their consent. A student debt crisis that turned higher education into a financial trap, a housing market that turned home ownership into a generational joke, wages that flatlined while the cost of everything else quietly doubled. The dream car didn't disappear. It just kept getting pushed back. Next year, when I pay off the loans, when I get the promotion, when the kids are older. And here's what psychology tells us about deferred dreams that most people get completely wrong. Delay doesn't weaken desire, it concentrates it. Every year that passes without acquiring the object your brain encoded as a fundamental life milestone doesn't reduce the emotional charge attached to it. It compounds it, like interest on a debt you didn't know you were accumulating. By the time a millennial hits 38 and finally has the financial breathing room to consider buying a sports car, they're not just buying a car, they're paying off 25 years of psychological interest on a promise their childhood brain made to their future self. Now, the internet loves to call this a midlife crisis, and the internet is wrong, as usual. What's actually happening has a far more precise name in psychological literature: narrative identity repair. Here's the concept. Humans don't just live their lives. They narrate them constantly. We construct an ongoing story about who we are, where we came from, and where we're going. And that story needs to feel coherent. When a major life milestone gets indefinitely deferred, especially one that was emotionally encoded during the identity formation years, it creates what psychologists call a narrative gap, an unresolved chapter, a story that doesn't quite add up. The dream car isn't a luxury purchase, it's a plot resolution. It's the adult brain finally closing a loop that's been open since 1998. It's saying, I told you I'd get here. I told you this version of me existed. Here's the proof. This is why millennials who buy their childhood dream car almost universally report that the experience feels different from buying any other car, more emotional, more significant, sometimes inexplicably more like relief than excitement. Because it is relief. Is the relief of finishing a sentence that's been hanging in the air for 2.5 decades. There's one final layer to this that almost nobody talks about, and it might be the most interesting one. The specific cars millennials are chasing aren't just nostalgic, they're analog. No touchscreens, no driver assistance systems, no car that talks back to you or judges your lane changes. Just mechanical feedback, engine noise, and the raw, unmediated experience of controlling something physical with your hands and feet. For a generation that has spent the last 15 years increasingly mediated by screens, where every experience is filtered, optimized, and algorithmically curated, a 1993 RX-7 isn't just a car. It's a corrective experience. It's proof that reality still exists, that you can touch something real, feel something real, and have an experience that isn't being tracked, monetized, or served back to you as a targeted ad. The childhood dream car in 2026 isn't just about nostalgia. It's about reclaiming a version of existence that felt more honest, more physical, more present, more yours before the world became a notification. So the next time you see a millennial standing in a parking lot, slightly emotional about a 30-year-old Japanese sports car, don't call it a midlife crisis. Don't call it impractical. Don't call it anything, actually. Just understand that what you're witnessing is a human being trying to keep a promise they made to themselves when they were 12, in a world that spent the next 2 decades making that promise very, very difficult to keep. The car was never the point. It was always the feeling. And some feelings, the ones that get burned into you during those critical years, wrapped in the smell of a CRT monitor and the sound of a Gran Turismo loading screen, don't fade. They just wait, patiently, until you can finally afford them.